Hi, everybody, and welcome. This is the Apostate Prophet. I hope you're having a fantastic day. Today, I'm here with a very special program, something that I have planned in advance, something that is very necessary. I have decided to sit down with an expert, a scholar on the Bible. I'm talking today to Dr. Joshua Bowen. Hi, Dr. Bowen. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, thank you so much. Before we get into finding out more about what we want to talk about today, I'm very interested in your background and your expertise and education. If you could enlighten us on that.
Sure. So I got a bachelor's in religion. Um, I graduated in 2003, I think, and I went into a 126 semester hour master's program, which anybody that has a master's degree knows that's oddly an oddly large number of semester hours for a master's degree. But that was in Old Testament studies in the Hebrew Bible. So I wrote my master's thesis on the meaning of the divine name El Shaddai, and I taught Hebrew for 2 years while I was there. And then went to Johns Hopkins University, where I got a master's degree in ancient Near Eastern studies, and then went on for my PhD there in Assyriology, which is the study of ancient Mesopotamia, languages and cultures of ancient Iraq, and minored also in Hebrew Bible because of my background in Hebrew Bible and Old Testament studies. So that's my background. I got a Fulbright scholarship in 2014 to go to Germany and work on Assyriology out there. I also won another scholarship called the Day, which is a German scholarship. But yeah, so I've been doing this for a little while, I guess, and know a little bit about it here and there. Feels like.
Yeah, to put it very mildly, right? I feel very humbled right now by
Don't.
the weight of your
I
of your
appreciate
education
that.
and all that. Uh, I can't imagine myself ever at this point onwards acquiring that much education and authority in these very interesting fields. But I'm very
It
happy to
takes
have you
a
here.
it takes a very special kind of psychosis, I think, to do that. Just kidding.
Well, you seem
Half
to have
kidding.
taken it very well. Yeah. Thank you so much for that introduction. So, I basically talked to you a little bit about this whole issue that I want to address today. I want to talk about certain biblical locations that are brought up related to the Psalms, a very specific Psalm, Psalm 84, and also specific locations that are mentioned throughout the Hebrew Bible in general. I want to discuss these things with you because certain apologists, Islamic apologists, nowadays have this revisionist approach where they try to reinterpret those locations and make it look like those locations could be connected to the Islamic narrative, to the Islamic history, which they think is true and real. I want to start first off by going very briefly, if you want to touch upon that, into what we know about locations in the Bible. It mentions a lot of locations, some of them very significant, some of them less significant. In general, what can we say regarding the specific locations of certain sites that are mentioned in the Bible?
Yeah, it's complex, right? So, I wrote a book recently where I have a chapter on archaeology and just how archaeology developed. Now, I'm not an archaeologist, by profession. I have a lot of archaeological training, but to get into those types of matters in great detail, we'd want to talk to somebody like William Deaver or Israel Finkelstein or, any number of archaeologists of Syro-Palestine. But the study of the Hebrew Bible, starting in over 100 years ago, 150 years ago, even earlier, was very much focused. Archaeology is very much focused on what does the Bible say? What does the Hebrew Bible say when we open up our Old Testament and it says, Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho, and it says that Jericho should be here, then that's where we're going to go dig, right? And that was the idea. They always said they had the Bible in one hand and the spade in the other, and that's how they excavated. And it became clear over time, it didn't always work out quite that way. It wasn't so much that the sites weren't where they were supposed to be. That was often quite quite accurate. It's that when they were supposed to be destroyed or when they were supposed to have been inhabited, those are the things that are, difficult to reconcile with the Hebrew Bible. So Jericho, like we know where Jericho is, we know where the city of Ai is. There are lots and lots of cities that when the Bible says, X happened at this city, and it gives a sort of a location of where that would be, that it actually does work out that way. That's where that city is. It's just that the chronology very often doesn't match up. So a lot of work has been done in, even in recent years, on the sites that are involved in the Exodus traditions, in the book of Exodus, and of course in Numbers as well, the book of Numbers, as well as the wilderness wanderings, when the Israelites were supposed to have wandered around for 40 years. They didn't really wander all that much, but, they were sort of in one general area. But then, the sites where they were supposed to come in Transjordan and then conquer the land across the Jordan River. And those sites, again, lots of work has been done. We archaeologists have identified a good many of them. And I think with pretty reasonable certainty. Certainly cities like Jericho and Ai and, Kadesh Barnea, of course, several that are, on the way out of Egypt have been identified. And so there's some debate about is this the site, or is this one that's close by at the site? But they've identified with reasonable certainty many of these sites.
Some of the locations that you mentioned already, like Kadesh Barnea, are very relevant to the topic that we want to explore today. I want to go into one of the main topics that I informed you about before, that I would humbly ask your opinion about, which is the Valley of Baca, as it reads in our Latin text of the Bible, specifically in Psalms 84. What do we know about the Valley of Baca and where this valley is supposed to be located?
So to answer that, I think it probably would be good to take a small step back and talk a little bit about Psalm 84 and maybe the Psalms in general. So a lot of work was done early on and continues to be done on how the Psalms were used, right, as these sort of short little units. And we don't have to go into any great detail about this, but the Psalms tend to be able to be grouped into different categories. So there are Psalms of praise, there are Psalms of, prayer, or, penitentiary Psalms. There are Psalms that are imprecatory Psalms. The one that always gets sort of touted out as Psalm 137, where it's praying for the enemies to have I probably shouldn't mention that, but, not great things to happen to the babies of the enemies. But these are types of Psalms that when you read them, you kind of, in many cases, can quickly sort of say, okay, well, that's this type of Psalm, or it's this type of Psalm. Well, there's a type of Psalm that has been variously known as the Song of the Ascents, or the Psalms of Pilgrimage. And basically what these are is they're Psalms about the journey to Jerusalem. Probably at most once a year, the people might be able to afford or be able to go up to Jerusalem for the annual feasts, particularly those that live far away. And of course, it's a journey, right? It's a pilgrimage to get there. It's quite a trek, and there are lots of valleys and hills that one has to traverse. And then, of course, when you're actually going up to Jerusalem, to Mount Zion, you're going uphill, and so they refer to those as the Psalms of the Ascents, because you're ascending, and that's where those sort of pilgrimage ascent psalms come from. Well, Psalm 84 is one of these. The psalm talks about that journey, and there's some difficult parts to the psalm, as far as lexicography is concerned, and trying to nail down exactly from textual criticism what's actually there. But it's pretty clear from the layout of the psalm that this is the group of worshipers that are going up to Jerusalem. This is like a a song that they're singing, a psalm that they're singing on their way there. So it's a pilgrimage psalm. That leads into this line about as they travel through the valley of Bacha. Scholars take different approaches to this. There are basically two main views on what the word there means. The reason that it's unclear is we're not exactly sure what the form of the word is. So as it stands in like the main Masoretic text tradition, you have this word Bacha with an aleph at the end. And the aleph, Beit Kaf, aleph has, is variously translated like balsam trees. It's a certain type of tree that has produces gum, and I'm not an expert on trees or anything like that. But if it's spelled that way with the aleph, then it takes on sort of that meaning. So then it's sort of like, okay, well, these types of trees tend to grow in dry areas or sandy areas, more arid areas. And that would fit with the psalm because it's like as the worshipers are making their pilgrimage through this dry area where these balsam trees are, that springs are, coming up. And so it's like they're bringing the joy with them and enlivening the land. That's one, way that that's been interpreted. Many of the translations, the versions of the Hebrew Bible, like the Greek Septuagint or the Latin Vulgate or the Syriac Peshitta, they are rendering it from a different root, different Semitic root. And instead of rendering it from Beit Kaf Aleph, they take it from Beit Kaf He. And Bacha there, as a verb, means to weep or to cry. So in Hebrew, if I say ani boche, it's like I am crying, I am weeping. And so then, there are different ways that you can go with that. If you see this as weeping, then you can take it more metaphorically. The word Amek, so the valley, the Amek Bacha, could be an actual, like a valley, right? But it also has this more metaphorical or poetic meaning of like deep. So when you couple deep with sorrow or weeping, then you have like very deep sorrow. If you don't take the word Bacha to be like a proper noun, the actual name of a particular valley, I think that's probably where there's some confusion in the versions.
There's actually something related there. I'm sorry for
Sure,
interrupting
no, go ahead.
there, but that the text says Habacha, which some say should be referring to it as a noun and as a proper noun, probably.
So if you look up the way that proper nouns are used, quite often there is no that word, that form ha on the front is like al in Arabic, the definite article. Oftentimes proper nouns don't receive the definite article. So like I wouldn't say Beit Ha Yosef, I would say Beit Yosef. Mm-hmm. And the fact that Joseph, the house of Joseph, it's a proper noun that often doesn't require the definite article because it's definite in and of itself. It's a particular person in and of itself. But you also do have certain toponyms, certain proper nouns that are geographic areas or cities or places that do contain the definite article. So it doesn't surprise me. And there are people that do take this as like a definite place, like a definite valley. It's just we don't know where it would be specifically.
And we have certain, as far as I understand it, we have certain valleys throughout the Bible that are often not mentioned to refer to a specific place of great importance, but that are mentioned simply as in poetic form as part of the narrative. This is not unique to that specific psalm, as I see it, right?
Sure, yeah, like something like Psalm 23, for example, is just what I'm pulling off the top of my head. It says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, is this a particular valley? Probably not. This is probably just poetic, expression of some very, shadowy, deep, emotional state that the person is in, or dangerous situation that the person is in, or whatever. And I haven't read all the secondary literature on Psalm 23, so maybe there are people that do think that that's a particular valley. But the name, like, this is the valley of the shadow of death over here, and this one over here is the valley of the non-shadow of life. I don't know, whatever. But I don't think it probably doesn't work that way. It's probably poetic.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. In Psalm 84, we are talking about going to Zion, going to a place called Zion, and it very clearly talks about a longing for this place and going to this place for pilgrimage purposes. So we would imagine that this valley of Bacha, whether it refers to an actual place or whether it is metaphorical, would then refer to something in this surrounding of Zion.
Yeah.
There is one matter, which is certain apologists that I have had discussions with have brought up this idea that Zion in this psalm does not refer to Jerusalem, or does not refer to Mount Zion, or the heart of the temple, or the city, or Israel in general, but it could mean something else. Like it could be referring to a different place of worship, like Mecca, for example. But I pointed out that I'm not at all familiar with this, and when I research further into this, I don't see that Zion is used for different places traditionally, since Zion is in reference to a specific mount and to a specific location, which then becomes a synonym of Jerusalem and of Israel in general. Is that a reasonable suggestion, that the Zion in this psalm could be referring to something else instead of Jerusalem?
I mean, there's no doubt, and I haven't dug deep or anything into all the different usages of Zion, so that might be something interesting to look at in more detail. But certainly, it almost exclusively, it refers to parts of Jerusalem, right? There is a broader notion, or like a broader usage, where it can refer to like all of Judah in the south. The specific context, without looking, I suspect that those will fall in line with people that are outside of the land, and they're saying, let's go up to Zion. That maybe it carries this idea of all of the southern portion of Palestine. But again, it all sort of focuses in on Jerusalem. I don't know of any usage that would indicate it's something outside of relationship with Jerusalem or with Judah.
And it would be inconsistent, right? Because when we look at the psalms around it, related psalms in the same category, psalms that are also attributed to the sons of Korah, for example, we see Zion so much in these psalms, and
Sure.
they, looking at the context, very clearly refer to Mount Zion, or to Israel, to Jerusalem. So it would be very, it would be very strange that this would refer to something completely different.
Sure. Yeah. In this psalm, absolutely. Like I'm trying to think, are there any usages ever of Zion that might be, but certainly here in this Song of the Ascent, or a pilgrimage psalm, I mean, this is very, very explicitly referring to Jerusalem, and this is where they're going for their holy feast. Like that's what the psalm is talking about. So, I mean, this is what it certainly what it refers to in Psalm 84, in my opinion. But again, it's sort of it's part of the trek, right? It's part of the journey. Most scholars that I looked at would take this more metaphorically. Most understand this to be sort of a metaphorical dry area that is becoming lush or becoming green as they bring their joy in this ascent up to Mount Zion.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I want to talk with you about one specific issue that is related to all of this, which is the wilderness of Paran, or the desert of Paran. Mm. And the claim is that the desert, or the wilderness of Paran, is probably the western coast, the Hejaz region, which would then also include Mecca, which is why certain biblical, mentions of the desert of Paran could be references to Mecca. And this, as I see it, conflicts entirely with what the general biblical consensus is about where Paran is located.
Yeah.
To your knowledge, what can we say about the location of Paran?
So there are a couple different passages in the Hebrew Bible that give pretty clear indications about where the wilderness of Paran is. One is Numbers chapter 13. And in Numbers chapter 13, this is talking about the time when the children of Israel have sort of encamped along the southern border of Canaan, and they're getting ready to send in spies to spy out the land. And if you look at Numbers 13, it talks about that they get sent out from the wilderness of Paran in the south, and they go up into the land and they spy it all out, and then they return back to the wilderness of Paran. And it says specifically that they go back, I think it's in verse 26, if I'm remembering that correctly. It says, and they went back to Kadesh Barnea, which is in the wilderness of Paran. And this fits quite well, right? The idea that the Israelites are, along the southern border and going in, it's indicating that if you knew nothing else about it, that they're right on the border of Canaan. And if you think about where they've come from, if you get like a map in your mind of Egypt and the Mediterranean, they've come from Egypt. They're around the southern portion, south of Israel, and then they come up on the southern border. So in between Egypt, it's got to be somewhere in between Egypt and southern portion of Canaan, down by the Negev, which fits. And of course, this fits also. There's another passage in First Kings where Solomon, I believe, is the one that goes and fights against Hadad and Edom. And when Hadad leaves, he's just a boy, and he flees from Edom, which is, like down in the south of the Dead Sea, and flees from there, goes through the area of Midian, which is like southern Transjordan, and goes through the wilderness of Paran to Egypt. So I mean that the path is very clear. He's going slightly south and west, and he's coming down into Egypt. So that all sort of locates this area, the wilderness of Paran, in that area. And then more specifically, when we learn that Kadesh Barnea is in the larger area that's called the wilderness of Paran, we know where Kadesh Barnea is, right? And like we know which site that is, Kuderet. And so yeah, I mean, this is all stuff that's south of the Negev, and in between Sinai, like the Sinai Peninsula, and Egypt, right? It's all sort of in that area. Hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, no, it does. It does. The Bible mentions several wildernesses and deserts. So even if it is in the Sinai Peninsula, that would make it a separate wilderness or a separate desert within the peninsula. It wouldn't mean that there is only one desert or only one wilderness in the Sinai Peninsula, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's really important to recognize that following this, return of the spies, that the Israelites are then sort of doomed to wander around for that generation. And where they wander, quote unquote, is essentially Kadesh Barnea, right? So this is an important area that they're wandering in. And I think 38 years they spend in Kadesh Barnea or around it. So, it's a significant area. And again, it's in between. It's much easier to picture this, I think, if you have a map. Maybe it can be thrown up on the screen at some point.
I will do that.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that the path that is being taken, whether you're coming out of Edomite territory or you're coming out of Canaan proper, it's down to the south, to the west, and it's in between Canaan and Egypt. That's where it's depicted in the biblical text.
It seems very unlikely to me when I look at the narrative of the Bible in general and how it describes places and sites that something like the desert of Paran or the wilderness of Paran, even if we didn't have, the whole context and all the connected, dependent locations, some of which are very obvious to us, even if we didn't have any further information, it seems very unlikely to me that the desert of Paran could be referring to a very large region like the entire Hejaz region or the entire western coast of Arabia, right? I mean, this would be very uncommon as far as I see it from my readings.
Yeah, I mean, there seems to be a fair amount of specificity when you look at these passages. It seems to be that sure, Kadesh Barnea is the city, and then the larger area in which Kadesh Barnea is the wilderness of Paran. But if you just think about the area in between, above Sinai and to the east of Egypt and to the west of Midian, I mean, it's big on a map, I guess, depending on what you're talking about. But I mean, it's very much a localized region. And I think that if you're trying to make it into an area that's larger, it sort of bucks against it makes the journey odd for somebody like Hadad coming out and then going somewhere else and then coming back up and going to Egypt. It doesn't seem like that's what they're intimating in the text, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very helpful. I like all the information that we are getting. I just want to ask you a few questions, a series of questions, and you may or may not answer them depending on whether you want to go into those or whether I don't know, these are things that you have specifically dealt with, or whether you want to give an opinion on these things. In your opinion, or to your knowledge, or just going by reason, do you think there is any possibility that the Israelites throughout their history, which is somewhat recorded by the Bible, had any big relations with a place that is very far south, like Mecca, for example, as we know it today? Did you ever know of such a thing or hear of such a thing?
Yeah, nothing is coming to mind. And Mecca's pretty far south.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, not that I know of, but I haven't looked into like trade relations or anything like that. If that level of relationship would be relevant, that wouldn't surprise me in any way that there's trade relations. You have to think the two major highways, the Way of the Sea and the King's Highway, run through Israel. So, if you're doing anything down to the south, or if you're doing anything up to the north into Anatolia and Mesopotamia or further east, chances are it's going to come through Palestine. So it wouldn't surprise me if there are trade relationships, but I don't know of any mention in the biblical text. That's none that stand out to me. That probably didn't help at all, but
It absolutely did, actually, because I mean, even the lack of knowledge of such a thing just points more toward the idea that there's probably not really much to it. But of course, this is a discussion that we can wholly go into at some different point, if you would like to. One other question that I have is the assertion that Abraham might have gone down to Mecca to build a temple there. I mean, as far as I see it, we have the accounts of the story of Abraham, because it is so fundamental and so significant to the Hebrew Bible. We have them all very much laid out, and there are maps made about these things. Is it conceivable to you that he would have gone down there to Mecca to build a very significant temple?
There's certainly nothing in the text of the Hebrew Bible that would lead me to believe that would have happened. Genesis is pretty clear in the stories that it tells, about where he was and what he was doing. So, coming from Ur of the Chaldees, not that I would say, just to be clear, not that I would say that's necessarily historically accurate, because I don't think that it is, but, the way that the narrative portrays it, he's coming from the east, coming into Canaan, wandering through Canaan's, building tents, and altars and all these things. He goes down south a couple of times, but then comes back up. The stories, I think, are pretty. The Abrahamic cycle, I think, is relatively clear, and I don't see anything in there that would lead me to believe that he exited Canaan to any great distance.
I mean, it seems implausible to me anyway that he would. The narrative would be the Islamic narrative, or the narrative that that Muslim apologists would suggest, is that Abraham, under the the authority, the command of Allah or God, went down there to Mecca to build the first house dedicated to God there in Mecca. I mean, it seems implausible to me that such a highly important thing would have no mention at all in biblical scripture, and it would also seem implausible to me that after doing that, he would just again go, up there to the to the regions now known as Israel, and to just pursue the rest of his life there.
Yeah, I mean, would it? I trying to play devil's advocate. I mean, is there some thought that maybe, and I don't see any evidence of this, but does the argument go on that front that this would have been revisionistic history, that it actually would have been in the original, stories, and that this was, either taken out or re-edited so that it would look, is that the idea? 'Cause
Yeah, it depends on who we're talking to, but the general assertion is
Okay.
made, and then there are certain different methods to explain the inconsistency, the discrepancy between the Islamic accounts and the Jewish or the Hebrew accounts of this issue.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how. I'm trying to be fair, in my thoughts here. That doesn't seem plausible to me. Um, because I think we know a fair amount about the editorial history of the Hebrew Bible, particularly the Pentateuch, particularly that section of the Pentateuch. And there's nothing that I can think of that would lead me to believe that that editorial history would have resulted in taking out something that monumental that was there.
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine that the writers would have spun it, perhaps, in a way that would have been beneficial. Deleting it completely, that seems difficult. That seems implausible. But those are just my thoughts. Somebody like Joel Baden up at Yale, that would be a really good question for him, because he works obviously specifically in the editorial history of the Pentateuch. But yeah, but I don't see any reason to suspect that that's the case.
Yeah, and I don't want to put too much on you here. I know I'm just trying to get out information from you. From
Sure, yeah.
you know so far.
I will be very honest with you about what I don't know. So that much you can count on.
That's very much appreciated. Well, I love having you here, and I want to have you on here again. One last question. You don't have to answer it, as said. One final question is, as a scholar, a student, a scholar, an expert on various fields that deal with biblical history, with the Near East, have you heard of the Kaaba as a place of significance in the larger ancient history of these regions and the mythologies and traditions and religions? Is this something that, to you, in your understanding and in your entire scholarship, is something that is of significance?
Nothing comes to mind as far as the textual data is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
From an archaeological standpoint, I still don't know of anything, but that would be perhaps another area to explore. But again, I have some background, fair amount of background in archaeological, matters archaeological. Anthropology, I don't really have a lot of background in anthropology, so maybe that would be another way to come at this. But nothing that I know of in my investigations would, off the top of my head here, would suggest that area being of importance to individual worshipers, or those that are in Palestine worshiping. Nothing that I know of, or of it being a place of importance just in the broader ancient Near East. Nothing that I know of.
Mm-hmm. This is already very enlightening. I mean, you might not see it as such, but getting these responses just confirms what I, very, very much know and very much expect. The lack of information, the lack of knowledge about these things very much confirms the idea that there is probably not much significance to the whole thing. And but this is definitely something that I think can be explored, and I would definitely be interested in reaching out to you and getting your help again in various matters in these fields.
Sure.
I think our analysis, our research, my quest for information from a scholar like yourself on these matters is very much complete here at this point. But as said, I would love to have you back again. I hugely enjoyed this, and I think this is extremely beneficial.
Well, I'm glad that I could help.
I appreciate it so much. Is there anything else that you want to add to anything that we have talked about?
We've talked a little bit about archaeology, and I know it's a terrible self-promotion, but if you're interested in like a basic introduction to what archaeology is and how it works, and how biblical archaeology works and how it's developed, and also just the story of the Bible. We've talked a lot about Abraham. And if you're interested in what the narrative of the Hebrew Bible actually is just saying, what the story is, the book that I published recently, The Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament, has an entire chapter dedicated to the story of the Old Testament and an entire chapter dedicated to archaeology and how it works. There are other things in it, obviously, but those are the two things that we've talked about that I think are covered and could be useful to the listener if they're interested in that.
When I heard of you and when I decided to get in touch with you, I actually purchased your book, and I am studying it right now and going through it. It's very interesting. It's a very different perspective. I hugely appreciate it. So I would definitely encourage everybody who is interested in these subjects to also consider it and to also get a copy of that book. Read it, listen to it. It's very interesting. What I definitely forgot to plug here at the very beginning, at least we shouldn't forget it at the end, Dr. Joshua Bowen also has his own work on a dedicated YouTube channel, which is known as Digital Hammurabi, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah. My wife runs it primarily. I contribute to it. But yeah, it's all about the ancient Near East and the Hebrew Bible. It's trying to bring those things to, what do we say, interested non-specialists. That's what we say. Trying to make the ancient Near East sort of come to life, including the Hebrew Bible. So, and we've got everything there from videos about what life was like in the ancient Near East to we have a video series on how to learn Sumerian. If you're interested in learning Sumerian, or we have a series on how to learn biblical Hebrew, and all that stuff's free on there. So,
That actually stuck out to me. I saw that you have a very popular video on how to learn or how to speak or how to read Sumerian.
We actually wrote, because it was so popular, we put a little book, a book out about it, how to learn ancient Sumerian, and it's pretty popular. So
that's awesome. I mean, that is such an interesting thing. It's not something that you just encounter and find everywhere. This is very special, really.
Yeah, but it's great. I mean, the thing that I love, and I'll be quiet about it, but the thing I love about Sumerian, the languages and cultures of ancient Iraq. I mean, if you understand Sumerian, it's like you understand where, I don't want to be over dramatic, but like where we came from. Right. I mean, writing is first invented in Mesopotamia, right? It's invented in Iraq. And I think the world owes a great debt of gratitude to ancient Mesopotamia and to people that have carried on those traditions. So, I'm excited that we can sort of be a part of that and help people kind of get back to the roots, get back to where Western civilization really was born. So, I'm excited about that.
When I research matters related to my former religion, which I mainly focus on, which is Islam, I also find a lot of, patterns, a lot of things that it has in common with ancient traditions, a lot of things that lead back to, as it seems to me, Sumerian culture and Sumerian beliefs. Right? So it can teach us so much, as I see it, about the religions, the traditions, the mythological ideas that we hold.
Yeah, and I'm actually teaching through the book live on Sunday evenings at I think it's at 7:30 Eastern Standard on a channel called the Atheist Network Group, TANG, I think is how they do it for short. I have a student there that runs the channel that is learning Sumerian live. So if you are interested in seeing how the language goes together, it's a great channel to go to.
This is very interesting to me. I will probably make a short clip of this as well. I mean, it's not as uninteresting to me and to the channel as you want to think it is. But
I appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Joshua Bowen. Everybody. I wasn't great enough at plugging it here, but as said, Dr. Joshua Bowen is a great expert on various extremely interesting fields and various extremely related fields to everything that I am doing and that people are interested in who are on this channel. So you can purchase his books, you can buy his recent book and read it. It is very interesting. You can go over and visit his YouTube channel, Digital Hammurabi. You can subscribe to that. Please go ahead and subscribe to that. It is hugely interesting, something that the world, I think, needs more of. I am very happy to have you here today, Dr. Bowen, and I, as said many times before, I will be glad and happy to have you back again.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a fantastic day, and I will see you again.